Hello everyone, welcome to Middle East Now. First, our headlines. High-stakes negotiations on a Gaza ceasefire are scheduled for tomorrow. Pressure on Iran is mounting to avoid an escalation throughout the Middle East. And the under-the-radar war between Iranian proxies and the United States in Syria and Iraq. A few deadlines are converging in the Middle East. Tomorrow was the day the U.S., Egypt and Qatar called the decision day regarding a ceasefire and a hostage deal in Gaza. I-24 News' Jody Natilovich has the latest.
A quote, last chance for all parties to reach a hostage deal as they convene in Doha on Thursday. Mediators from the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt will present the proposed changes to the ceasefire and hostage release deal between Israel and Hamas and address the remaining concerns of both sides. The families of the hostages are optimistic that this round could finally see their loved ones return.
For the past 3 months, they've been talking about a new proposal and a new deal. There's a gathering on Thursday in Qatar, I believe, and we're hopeful that this time it will make it.
But details of the new proposal and how it differs from previous versions remain unclear. At a Wednesday news conference in Beirut, U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein said it would be beneficial for all in the region if a deal is reached.
Speaker Barry and I also talked about the framework agreement that's on the table for a Gaza ceasefire, and he and I agreed there is no more time to waste and there's no more valid excuses from any party for any further delay.
Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu denied he had made changes to the ceasefire proposal.
Prime Minister Netanyahu's July 27th letter does not introduce extra conditions and certainly does not contradict or undermine the May 27th proposal. In fact, Hamas is the one that demanded 29 changes to the May 27th proposal, something the Prime Minister refused to do.
On Sunday, it was announced that Hamas would not be taking part in this third round of talks, despite Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar reportedly expressing interest in ending the war.
It is Hamas that continues to set additional terms and has refused to reach an agreement.
Washington will be heavily pressuring all sides to arrive at an agreement this time around, but mediators are also bracing for its possible failure.
Here in the studio with me are Ambassador Dani Ayalon, former Israeli ambassador to Washington, and I-24 News Middle East correspondent Ariel Oseran. Ariel, let's start with you. There's a report claiming a major cyber attack on the banking system in Iran. What do we know?
Yeah, so this is coming from opposition media in Iran, or actually located outside Iran, so we need to take this carefully, but reporting widespread cyber attack that has targeted Iran's central bank, but also additional banks in the country. Let's take a look at what some locals in Iran posted a video of them at an ATM trying to withdraw money, but they get this statement, which reads, "Dear customers, it is not possible to withdraw money from the bank because all of Iran's budget and national resources have been invested in the war for the benefit of the corrupt regime of the Islamic Republic." Now, this is already being touted as one of the most significant cyber attacks to ever target Iranian infrastructure. Right now, we're seeing that this is mainly on the banking system. We've seen in the past also on the gas stations across the country, the trains. Now it seems that it's the banking system. And given this statement that people who try to withdraw money see, it is clear that this is definitely coming from not friends of the Islamic Revolution, right, to say the least. Still no confirmation from within Iran, no. No official confirmation to that. We'll follow and see what happens with that. Let me bring in Jason Brodsky, Policy Director of United Against Nuclear Iran. Good to see you again. Good evening. By the way, any comment about this cyber attack? Have you heard anything?
Well, I think it's very interesting that a few days ago there were reports in the Wall Street Journal that the U.S. was conveying very strong messages to Iran. It was deliberating on a retaliation against Israel about the fact that they risk their economy and the stability of the new Pezeshkian government if they decide to mount a significant retaliatory attack. So I think some external actor is trying to send a message and to sharpen the choices of the Iranian regime.
Let's try and figure out, with your help, what's the Iranian calculation right now as whether to attack Israel, how to attack Israel, and so forth?
Well, I think that there has been a debate in the system. There are some, including in the IRGC, who are pressing for a robust response because they feel that Operation True Promise did not restore the requisite level of deterrence that their system was hoping for. And there are others who are counseling more restraint and not to fall into what they view as a trap for Israel to mount aggressive retaliation that could put the U.S. involved. And that's something that the Islamic Republic wants to avoid because it knows the United States has power to decimate its military. So those are two debates that are going on in the system right now. The Supreme Leader this morning made some comments about how a non-tactical retreat would incur God's wrath in the political, military realms. And that was a very telling statement. It's consistent with Khamenei's messaging over years. I'll recall during nuclear negotiations, he put forward a wrestler analogy, and that wrestler can take a timeout in a technical way, but not detract himself from the long-term goal. So this is how the Supreme Leader thinks.
Stay with us, Mr. Brodsky, Ambassador Ayalon here in the studio. The message from Israel to Iran is don't.
Right. I think just a small smidgen show of capabilities. And I fully agree with Mr. Brodsky that the main concern of Iran is a major war where the United States is part of it or even leading it. And the concern, of course, is that once and if there is such a war, then their nuclear facilities will be the first target of choice. This would be devastating for the regimes, not just for its credibility, not just for its reputation, but seriously, it will deny it a major card in the Iranians' negotiations for anything, the relief of sanctions or anything like that. So it seems like when the Americans, and also it's not just the Americans, the three major European countries also joined force with the United States to really impress upon the Iranians that they are really dealing with fire. And that means that they will not actually withhold, or they will not put any pressure on Israel not to retaliate. Now, when they talk about the devastation of Iran's economy, it's not just a matter of tampering with their ATM machines. It could also be taking out their entire infrastructure of the energy production, and Iran is very vulnerable.
Yeah. Jason, back to you. How far will the Iranians be willing to go to risk their nuclear program?
Well, I think the system is going to have to respond, and it's going to have to respond in a calibrated way to avoid what Ambassador Ayalon was saying, drawing the United States into the conflict. So I think that it could mount an operation like it did in April, Operation True Promise, where this time it could employ more ballistic missiles instead of drones to increase the chances of damage in Israel. And at the same time, we shouldn't discount the system also targeting Israelis and Jewish targets abroad in terrorist operations, and that's a very real risk moving forward.
And by the way, how is the nuclear program going? We've been hearing reports on progressive development there.
Yeah, the nuclear program, it keeps advancing, and we have also heard reports that the Director of National Intelligence's office has, for the first time in a long time, not included the standard language that they assess that the Iran Supreme Leader has not made the decision to weaponize. But at the same time, Iran keeps building out its capabilities, which can be applied to weaponization through the Organization of Defensive Independence education and research.
Jason Brodsky, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. The United States has approved another big military package to Israel, from trucks to jet fighters. I-24 News' Nicole Tzedek reports.
You can't fight a war without resources. And now Israel will receive about $20 billion worth of resources from the United States.
The United States is committed to the security of Israel, and it is vital to U.S. national interests to assist Israel to develop and maintain a strong and ready self-defense capability. This proposed sale is consistent with those objectives.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken signed off on the massive arms sales, which includes 50 F-15 fighter jets, 320 air-to-air missile launchers, and 33,000 tank shells.
Thank you to Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Secretary of State Antony Blinken for advancing critical force buildup initiatives that assist Israel in developing and maintaining its qualitative military edge in the region. As we fight to defend Israel on 7 different fronts, your message of support and commitment to Israel's security are clear.
But this approved sale isn't immediately ready for delivery. The tank rounds could be available before 2026, but the fighter jets won't be all set until 2029. Still, it's a sign of Washington's long-term commitment to the Jewish state, and comes just 3 weeks after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed Congress, asking for this exact type of support.
Today, as Israel fights on the front line of civilization, I too appeal to America. Give us the tools faster, and we'll finish the job faster.
The most recent sale follows the controversy of President Joe Biden freezing a shipment of 2,000-pound bombs to Israel in May to try and prevent a massive operation in Gaza's southern city of Rafah. But months later, as the threat from Iran and its proxies expands, the U.S. seems to be speeding up its military help to the region.
More on this now with Jonathan Lord from the Center for a New American Security. Thank you very much for joining us. Jonathan, shows an American commitment to Israel, though there are some sharp differences between the Biden administration and Netanyahu, to put it mildly, right?
Well, I'll first start by saying thanks for having me. And of course, the U.S. commitment to Israel remains ironclad. This sale, 5 foreign military cases, is just the latest in what has been a long succession of deals designed to support Israel's defense. With respect to the differences between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu, frankly, I think they're overstated. Every American president ultimately finds some degree of difference with Prime Minister Netanyahu historically. This president, the last president, the president before that. I think some of the political theatrics of there being differences and tensions really have more to do with Israel's domestic political scene and less with any meaningful differences in the U.S.-Israel relationship, which remains as strong as ever.
Let me bring back Ambassador Ayalon here in the studio. He called it right?
I believe so. Listen, we've known, the fact that it's reiterated that it's a vital interest of the United States to have a strong Israel. That again shows that they would like to actually reestablish deterrence. This deterrence, which actually collapsed on the 7th of October, is pretty much responsible for everything that we see now, with the escalation to the extent of a regional war, if not even beyond that. So I think what we see here is a very measured and planned step for the United States to do that. And I don't think necessarily it was heeding the call of Netanyahu in Congress, which again was looked upon as very partisan. They do it because of American interest, not necessarily because of Netanyahu's request.
Yeah. Back to you, Jonathan Lord. This show of force you see now in the Middle East by the United States right now as we speak, this is a powerful message that we haven't seen in a while.
Well, we've seen versions of this message since October 7th, beginning with President Biden's speech of don't. It was at that time that he first steamed a carrier strike group to the Middle East. It was last October, followed by a second carrier strike group. And now we are returning to that high level of posture and presence in the region. For a bit here, we're going to have 2 carrier strike groups in the region. CENTCOM announced as well that a guided missile submarine is coming back to the region as well. That has a complement of over 150 Tomahawk cruise missiles. There's no question that the U.S. is very interested in demonstrating to Iran that there can be serious ramifications if they take steps similar to what we saw in April, which are not in Iranian interests, they're certainly not in Israeli interests, and they're not in the interests of peace or restoring stability to the Middle East.
Will there be a point where this will be more than just words and posture? I mean, like real fire?
Well, we should hope not, I would imagine. I mean, the whole purpose of demonstrating this show of force is to show what possibly could happen if someone pushes a button. The purpose of this is to be able to give the president all of the possible options on the menu to neutralize that threat, but also potentially to preemptively prevent it if he thinks that's the proper course of action. So there's no question that up till now, over the course of the last 2 weeks, the president has been successful in his efforts to stay Iran's hand. If you'll remember, 2 weeks ago, the supreme leader immediately called for Iranian military action. So far, we have not seen it, thankfully. And I'm certain that there's a lot of more aggressive discussion going on behind the scenes to prevent an Iranian attack. And of course, we're not going to hear or see that from the White House because that would be counterproductive and would make it more difficult for Iran to back down.
All right. Jonathan Lord, I thank you very much. Let's move on to the Russian angle. John Hardy is the director of Russia program at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Good evening to you, and thank you for joining us. We are seeing now a strong and growing cooperation between Iran and Russia. Now even a talk of Iran selling ballistic missiles to Russia. Don't the Russians have enough of those already, by the way?
Well, thanks for having me on your program. I mean, the Russians have certainly increased their production of Iskander ballistic missiles and other missile systems since the full-scale war in Ukraine began. However, they could always use more. And the close-range ballistic missiles that Iran would provide, as I said, they're a little bit shorter range. So whereas the Iskanders maybe range 400, 500 kilometers, are useful for hitting deep targets, including critical infrastructure. The Iranian missiles would be used more in a tactical role, so it could allow Russia to conserve some of those longer-range missiles for strikes on the targets I mentioned.
How is the war in Ukraine have been influencing Russian thinking vis-a-vis the Middle East?
Well, one goal is, or one benefit rather, of the current crisis is to distract the West, and in general, Russia wants to try to, build ties with non-Western countries, if you want to call it the global South, or basically countries that are either enemies with the West or want to kind of maintain a neutral position. So certain countries in the Middle East are crucial to that. The UAE, Qatar. The Saudis all have various levels of cooperation with Russia. And of course, Iran has become an important source of Shahed strike drones, a little bit of artillery ammunition, and now potentially ballistic missiles.
Have the Ukrainians made a serious progress in the past couple of days in the battlefield?
Well, you're referring to the offensive in Russia's Kursk Oblast. Yes, absolutely. The offensive began on August 6th, caught the Russians by surprise. The border was weakly defended. Ukraine attacked with a highly mobile force that was able to push rapidly, 15, 20 kilometers deep into Russia, and they've since made some more gains. The Russians are flowing reinforcements to that area, so I think it's starting to stabilize to a degree, and the Russian defense is becoming more coherent. But at the same time, the Ukrainians are also taking this opportunity to dig in and try to put up their own stout defense to potentially hold the territory they've occupied.
John Hardy, thank you very much for that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Back to the studio here, Ariel Osseran, our correspondent. It's supposed to be a crucial day tomorrow in Doha. What is the latest?
The latest is that one side of the negotiation is arriving. Israel, the Prime Minister's office, announced that they will be sending a delegation and that its mandate for negotiating has been approved. The official roster hasn't yet been publicized, but my understanding is that it's going to include at least Dadi Barnea, the head of the Mossad. Obviously, the American, Egyptian, and Qatari mediators are going to be in Doha, but Hamas isn't going to be there. A bunch of different senior officials have been sent to Arab media explaining why they will not attend. Basically, they are concerned that any alternative proposal to the current proposal on the table will undermine their achievements in the negotiations, specifically additions that were introduced, such as Israel holding the Philadelphia axis. That's basically the border between the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula. Egypt, also the different mechanisms of monitoring who will be able to return north. But on the Philadelphia axis, I think an interesting statement coming right now from IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi, who speaking from the Philadelphia axis, saying that the IDF will know to maintain Israel's security interests regardless of what the political echelon decides, whether the IDF should stay there or not. The IDF can ensure Israel's security vis-a-vis the Philadelphia axis.
Ambassador Ayalon, this day tomorrow is really hyped as the last-minute chance to have a deal. Is it so?
Well, probably, although there's always a last-minute chance, even after the last minute. In diplomacy, the art of the possible. So I wouldn't at all discard the possibility of extended negotiations, especially as one side is not going to show up, which basically the Hamas boycotting tomorrow's negotiation in Doha is playing into the hands of Netanyahu.
Yeah, but I spoke to experts today and they said, Hamas doesn't really show up anyway. It's all like behind the scenes kind of negotiations.
Yes, but if you need to get some immediate answers, they may be just across the street and, there could be a give and take. If they are not there, they couldn't even be a give and take. And that means that Hamas is putting it on a basis of take it or leave it, which right now I don't think anybody can accept that, not even the negotiators on their side, Qatar and Egypt.
So we'll have to see what's going on tomorrow. I see some headlines in Israel in the past hour that the trio is actually going to these talks, head of Mossad Shin Bet and the IDF representative. And it looks like there's a message or a signal from Israel that things are positive, but this is, could be just another spin.
Jacob, what I would look into is whether General Nitzan Alon is going. If he is, then it's a positive sign, absolutely, because he's the one really pushing for an agreement immediately.
All right. Meanwhile, the IDF announced a daytime counterterrorism operation in the West Bank, which is a sign of growing tension in the area. Our correspondent, Nicole Tzedek, has more.
Explosions heard echoing through the West Bank cities of Tubas and Tamun as the IDF launches a counterterrorism operation in broad daylight.
A short while ago, as part of counterterrorism activity in the Jordan Valley area, an aircraft struck a number of armed terrorists in the area of the town of Tamun.
Palestinian media claims 5 were killed in the operation so far, including 4 in a drone strike targeting a group of gunmen. The IDF says several wanted Palestinians were also detained, as well as weapons and military equipment seized. This is the same area in the Jordan Valley where former IDF commando Jonathan Deutsch was killed in a drive-by shooting attack on Sunday. This latest operation comes after a string of West Bank raids as the IDF works to temper the brewing terror hub. Since October 7th, Israeli forces have arrested more than 4,400 wanted Palestinians, roughly 40% of them affiliated with Hamas. The Palestinian Red Crescent says more than 600 people have been killed in these raids as well. At the same time, 26 Israelis, including security personnel, have been killed in Palestinian terror attacks in what's often described as the third front of Israel's ongoing war.
And Ariel Saran, there's some additional information coming out.
Yeah, the IDF sharing a short while ago official confirmation and information on this operation that is concluded, but it took 12 hours, the operation in Tamun and Tubas. During this operation, one of the jeeps, you could see in Nicole's story that there was a IDF jeep that was being pulled out of the area. That's because it went over an IED, explosive device, injuring 4 soldiers inside, 2 moderate condition, 2 lightly wounded. Their families were notified and they're being treated in the hospital. But as Nicole said, a daytime operation, 12 hours in the heart of the West Bank. This is clearly, it may be the third front of Israel, but as far as the amount of forces that are allocated to it, it's perhaps the biggest front.
Right. And this is a major concern in Israel now.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. This is why the military would like to have a closure with Gaza, first and foremost, because they believe that they've rendered the Hamas enough of a military blow that they cannot be operational anymore. And then, of course, it has to be a political situation who will govern Gaza. But the major concern right now, although all eyes are focused on Hezbollah and Lebanon, is Iran and Jordan, because Iran is trying very much to unstable the regime of the King Abdullah,
right.
And that would make it a staging attack possibilities on Israel.
We'll take a short break now, and when we come back, the under-the-radar war between Iranian proxies and the United States in Syria and Iraq. In a moment.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back to Middle East Now. Hezbollah keeps firing rockets and drones into Israel's north, but if it chooses to attack central Israel, it will risk an all-out war on Lebanon. I-24 News' Ariel Osaran reports.
As Israel awaits a retaliatory strike from Lebanon, Hezbollah fighters continue to be targeted from the sky. At least 17 people were injured in a drone strike targeting a car and a motorcycle in the southern Lebanese town of Abbasiyah. It wasn't immediately clear how many of them were Hezbollah operatives. The airstrike followed several Hezbollah rocket and drone attacks on northern Israel with no reported injuries. The IDF responded by striking a Hezbollah military site in southern Lebanon's Aita Shaib.
We fully take responsibility for the situation we see before us in southern Lebanon. There is a systematic destruction of border villages and towns. There are daily assaults that escalate these aggressions. The least we can do is take our responsibilities with full seriousness, courage, and with all the strength we have.
As for the diplomatic route, U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein visited Beirut on Wednesday. In meetings with top Lebanese officials, Hochstein said a wider war between Israel and Hezbollah could be avoided.
We continue to believe that a diplomatic resolution is achievable because we continue to believe that no one truly wants a full-scale war between Lebanon and Israel, especially not the Lebanese people and the Israeli people. We can reach an end to the conflict now, but we understand that we also need to work to get to an end of the conflict in Gaza.
The Biden administration also sees a clear linkage between a Gaza ceasefire and a potential Iranian attack on Israel in retaliation for the killing of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran.
It's getting hard. We'll see what Iran does, and we'll see what happens if there's any attack. But I'm not giving up.
Are those two things tied together? Do you have the understanding that Iran could cease or stop doing an action if a ceasefire deal was possible?
That's my expectation, but we'll see. Thank you.
Biden's comments come after Iranian officials told Reuters that a retaliatory strike could be delayed to allow Gaza ceasefire talks to progress. But Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei hinted on Wednesday that avoiding such a strike against Israel would be a mistake. According to the interpretation of the Holy Quran, Khamenei said, a non-tactical retreat in any field, be it in the military field, political, propaganda, or economic fields, leads to God's wrath.
I-24 News' Balir Sladin is now in northern Israel, standing by live. What's the latest there, Balir?
Yes, so Hezbollah is continuing their attacks against Israeli territory in the north. The latest was around 3:30 this afternoon. 2 rockets landed in Kiryat Shmona, actually 4, according to what the municipality there has said. Apparently, they caused damage to the bus station there, but there were no casualties as a result of that. Now, Hezbollah has taken responsibility, of course, for that attack, saying that it's because of the civilians, as he is calling them, or they are calling them, that were wounded in Tyre this morning, while there has been reports of targeted assassination through or by an Israeli drone in that area. 1 car was hit, another motorcycle. Apparently 3 Hezbollah members were killed in that attack, but several others were wounded, 16 in number, and Hezbollah is saying that they were civilians. As we see, whenever there are civilians wounded or killed, Hezbollah always responds with a large barrage of rockets, either to big cities like Kiryat Shmona or to towns that were not evacuated since October 8th, and that's what is the latest here on the ground. But of course, we're here today while Hochstein, the envoy to the region, is in Beirut, met with several Lebanese officials, officials, including the top general of the Lebanese army, the same body that, according to the American plan at least, would be actually in southern Lebanon to be used as a buffer zone between Israel and Hezbollah. But until now, we understand from sources in Lebanon, there's nothing new. Hochstein didn't bring anything new this day, just calling for de-escalation, hoping that the military actions, as they are calling it, will be limited only to the previous equation, or the equation since October 8th, so only the 10-20 kilometers deep inside Lebanon or in Israel. So just by saying this, it makes you understand that the Americans just gave up on the possibility of reaching a ceasefire or some sort of any agreement between Hezbollah and Israel until there is a ceasefire in Gaza, because of Hezbollah's declining of offers since the hostilities started. And also a couple of hours ago, the Minister of Finance, Bezalel Smotrich, the far-right minister, visited Metula, the city that is right on the border, talking to Israeli local officials there and saying that Israel should actually start a war against Hezbollah and transfer the security buffer zone, as he is calling it, from northern Israel to southern Lebanon. Smotrich in Metula saying that while he's one of the members of the government that didn't take that decision yet.
Right. Balis Ladin, thank you very much for your report. Here in the studio, Ambassador Dani Ayalon, I want to ask you, Israel pretty much put out the equation that an attack on central Israel, Tel Aviv area, for example, would be basically an invitation to attack Lebanon, not only Hezbollah.
Yeah, and this time, unlike 2006, no stops are going to be pulled. In 2006, Jacob, you remember the Second Lebanon War, we had two restraints, actually, from the Americans, namely Condoleezza Rice, who was the Secretary of State then, is not to harm infrastructure of Lebanon and try to minimize casualties among populations. Well, this time the rules of the games are going to be totally different, and again, the strategy here is to put immense pressure from within on Hezbollah, from the Lebanese government, the Lebanese people, and even the Lebanese army.
Right. Ariel Osseran, you've mentioned to me before the wording of Hochstein about Lebanon this time. You said he mentioned Lebanon, not Hezbollah.
Yeah, the war between Israel and Lebanon. Israel is not at war with the Lebanese military. In fact, the Lebanese military hasn't fired a single shot since October 8th. This is a campaign between Israel and Hezbollah, but Hezbollah has taken over Lebanon, and Lebanon now is faced with this looming war coming, and that's why we're seeing this diplomatic air train to Beirut. And after Hochstein, tomorrow the French foreign minister is expected to arrive in Beirut, and I think for people trying to gauge when the attack will come, while Hochstein is in Beirut, most likely won't happen. With the foreign minister in Beirut, the French foreign minister, probably won't happen. And so
someone joked about it on Twitter that they are coming one after the other just to avoid an escalation, just the physical presence.
With all the phone calls that they've been making amongst themselves for the past 2 weeks, I wouldn't be surprised if some scheme of that nature has been divulged among them. At the end of the day, the fact that you see Western countries trying to get more engaged, putting pressure on the Lebanese government, emphasizing that this is a step that Lebanon can avoid, can prevent if it steps up. This is the message that they've been pushing, and this is also something that Israel's been pushing. Just the equation, it wasn't just Tel Aviv, then Lebanon, it's Tel Aviv, Beirut. Now the thing is, the flip side of the coin is that Israel already targeted Beirut, eliminating a Hezbollah number 2 there. So it could be inviting already retaliation to Tel Aviv. So it'll be very interesting.
Well, I think it's a very astute observation that Hochstein mentioned war between Israel and Lebanon and not Hezbollah. And this is, I think, another proof that there is a message, a strong message to Lebanon, that this time the Americans are not going to tie Israel's hands as to infrastructure or other Lebanese targets.
Yeah, we haven't heard any warnings regarding this. We'll see what happens, of course. Meanwhile, a missile attack has targeted U.S. airbase in Deir al-Azur, Syria, according to Syrian state media. On Friday, a drone struck another base. And let's talk about this with Joel Rayburn, former U.S. Special Envoy for Syria. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
There was not much talk about it. It's like under the radar, but more and more is happening there in Syria and Iraq and American troops.
Sure. Well, this is the Iranian regime trying to put pressure on the U.S. administration to put pressure on Israel and to do essentially to carry water for the Iranian regime's political objectives.
Yeah, well, we are used to, so to speak, to Iranian proxies fighting Israel, but this is actually, would you say, an Iranian-American conflict via proxies?
Yes, of course, and it's been going on for quite some time. I mean, it dates back to the time of the Iraq War. It never really stopped across Iraq, and then over the course of 2017-18, when the U.S. military went into Syria as part of the campaign against ISIS. It wasn't very long into 2017 that Qasem Soleimani began carrying out proxy attacks against U.S. troops, both in northeast Syria and in the part of southeast Syria that the U.S. military is located at near the Jordanian border in Tanif. So it's been going on for quite some time. But the context now, there was quite a lull for a while, but the context now is that since October 7th, these attacks have been occurring with regularity because, as I said, it's a tool for the Iranian regime, it's leverage for the Iranian regime to try to get the U.S. administration to pressure Israel to stop what it's doing in Gaza in particular.
And what's your assessment of the American reaction so far?
Well, it's been way too weak. I think that's a decision that's come from the top. I think that, I mean, the U.S. military, I was a part of the U.S. military for 26 years in these same regions. The U.S. military knows what to do to protect itself and also to deter operationally these groups from carrying out such attacks. And I think their hands are tied from the top because there's a political posture at the top of the Biden-Harris administration not to respond in kind to Iranian proxy attacks, which signals fear, which signals weakness, I think, not just to the Iranians, but also to all of the local communities in Iraq and Syria. It's quite damaging.
Is the Biden administration, President Biden specifically, is more free to act now that he's not running for re-election?
Look, I think the U.S. is in sort of a political, it's in the high political season. I don't think anyone on any side is fully free to act. But beyond that, I think that President Biden and I think Vice President Harris, because of the things that she said, something he said yesterday indicates that this administration is locked into a false assumption about this conflict across the Middle East. When President Biden essentially said that he believed that if there is a ceasefire in Gaza, that would cause the Iranian regime to back off of its campaign, its proxy campaign and direct campaign against Israel. Now, this is as though to grant to the Iranian regime the fake rationale for its attacks, that it's being done in the service of Gaza, in the service of the Palestinian people. That's not why the Iranian regime is hostile to Israel and hostile to the United States. It's hostile to Israel because it wants to exert regional hegemony. It's hostile to the United States because it wants to expel us from the region so that it can dominate the region. And it doesn't have anything to do with Gaza. So I think it was really problematic that the president said that, because it's as though it's granting the supreme leader and the Revolutionary Guards their rationale in a way that I think is deeply counterproductive.
Joel Rayburn, I thank you very much for your comments. Back to the studio, Ambassador Ayalon, your comment?
Well, I totally agree. There is a real weak response of the United States to the Iranian provocations, not from now, but now for almost 2 decades. And it's not just the Democratic administration of Joe Biden. We have to remember in 2019, when there was an attack, Iranian attack on Aramco, in Saudi Arabia, which is really a red line that they crossed, where they actually neutralized almost 50% of the Saudi production of oil, and there was no response whatsoever. Whenever there is some kind of attack on Iran or Iranian proxies with nobody taking responsibility, the U.S. is first to come out to say it wasn't us. This is not really showing leadership, and I think it's also sending the wrong signals to the Iranian regime.
And speaking of which, what's happening with the Houthis in Yemen? The U.S. destroyed 2 vessels after the Houthis attacked a container ship, and there's more. I-24 News' Zach Anders reports.
The United Nations under siege in Yemen.
We appeal again with a heavy heart for their immediate and unconditional release.
In early June, 13 UN staffers and over 50 NGO workers were taken captive by the Iran-backed Houthis. This according to the United Nations, which claims they have been unable to communicate with those taken, their status unknown.
We are doing all we can to make sure that they are united with their loved ones as soon as possible. And until then, the de facto authorities must ensure that they are treated with full respect for their human rights, and they are able to contact their families and legal representatives.
Then on Tuesday, the UN announcing their human rights office in the Yemeni capital of Sana'a were raided by the Houthis back on August 3rd. While no immediate reports of additional staffers taken captive have emerged, the UN says documents, keys to the building, and the vehicles were taken.
Entering a UN office without permission and seizing documents and property by force are wholly inconsistent with the privileges and immunities of the United Nations. This is also a serious attack on the ability of the UN to perform its mandate, including with respect to the promotion and protection of human rights, which our office is there to defend.
The UN says they are still in control of this facility following this raid. Still, little is known of the more than 60 people tied to the UN operations in Yemen who have reportedly been taken by the Houthis.
Let's bring in Mr. Ahmed Sharawi from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you very much for joining us. Looking at this war over there in Yemen, who's winning this war?
Thanks for having me. First of all, the definition of victory differs from the U.S. and the Houthis, where the Houthis' survival is victory, and their ability to launch attacks against naval assets and commercial shipping is considered victory. For the U.S., it is limiting Houthi attacks and deterring them from launching from being a threat to Red Sea shipping. In this case, the Houthis are still continuing their attacks, they're increasing their attacks, and the U.S. has failed to deter them. So they are still a significant threat to the region, to maritime shipping, and to the neighboring countries in the Red Sea. Jordan, Israel, and Egypt have been economically impacted by these attacks.
Right.
And until this day, we cannot say who...
It was inconceivable to think that someone will do this in the Red Sea, and yet we've been seeing this for such a long time. And what's the outlook for the future? Do you have any idea?
Well, this is all part of deterring Iran and its proxies in the region. The Houthis are still a proxy of Iran. They act within the guidance of the Islamic Republic, and this is all part of their mission to pressure the United States and Israel. And so as long as this war continues, and as long as these attacks continue, there will be no sustainable solution to the issue in the Red Sea. And as long as the U.S. and the United Kingdom continue to undeter the Houthis, they will continue, or they will still remain a significant threat to maritime shipping.
The Saudis were not able to, face them. This huge coalition, apparently, also. So, what sustains this Houthi regime over there?
What sustains them is support from Iran. What sustains them is the inability of the international community to see them as a legitimate threat that needs to be dealt with. The international community had the chance in 2015 to help out Saudi Arabia and the UAE in their campaign against the Houthis. But of course, the United States did not support the Saudi Arabians to the full extent. And now we are seeing the repercussions of these actions. We are seeing a stronger Houthi movement, one that resembles a bigger threat than what it was in 2015.
Mr. Ahmad Sharawi, thank you very much for joining us. Here in the studio, back to you, Ambassador Ayalon. Well, the only serious strike that we've seen was from Israeli airplanes in Yemen, but that will not be enough.
Yeah, by the way, we do see that after this devastating attack of Israel on the port of Hodeidah, we see that actually incoming missiles from the Houthis on Israel has been quite substantially reduced. That's I think, a good lesson for everyone in the region, and first and foremost to the Americans. I think that in hindsight, the Americans made a strategic error where they actually put the pressure on the Saudis and the UAE to stop their operations in Yemen vis-a-vis the Houthis. I think that actually helping them, if the United States would have helped them even in a more significant way, first they would have dealt the Houthis a major damage, and also would occupy them, and where they fight for their own territory, and not as now, they seems like they feel controlling and the territory of the entire Middle East. I believe that the Houthis issue has become unproportionately and significantly more dangerous, and it has to be dealt with. And at the end of the day, it may be, again, a ground invasion. And the ones who can do it mostly are the Saudis, but they will need American support.
Yeah, and we don't see this happening so far. It all goes back to Iran. It all goes back to Iran. And the biggest question is, who's going to deal with Iran?
Exactly. The best thing to deal with Iran is actually to deter it. And right now it's not deterred. The one who can do it is the United States. The United States also has the wherewithal to actually deal the Iranians such a blow that can take out their entire nuclear infrastructure. And well, Israel, it has to be seen, but of course we do not match up at all to the U.S. capabilities. Maybe we can push them back a year or two, but this is not enough. It has to be United States leadership, and they should take the action and lead it, because a nuclear Iran is a devastating blow to the United States, to the entire regime of the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, whereby other countries will seek to have nuclear capabilities.
Okay. Now this, one crop in southern Israel has somehow survived the woes of October 7th. I-24 News' Emily Francis has more.
Since the October 7th massacre, the once flourishing farmland of the Negev dried up and laid fallow, with cowboys and other volunteers lending a hand. But one burgeoning Israeli crop got a wake-up call. The cocoa plant.
I transferred them on October 3rd. That weekend, on October 7th, there was the invasion and massacre. Everything was stopped. There was no electricity, there was no water, and all work activity was ceased immediately.
Just days before the invasion, a team of scientists from Israel's Agricultural Research Center, known as the Volcani Institute, sent 140 seedlings of 5 different strains of cocoa beans to a desert facility to study how tropical plants could be grown in dry conditions.
When we came back on January, we saw everything around us, all the experiments that died, and we were sure that also here we will find all the trees that are dead. When we opened the door to this greenhouse, we were very surprised to see a few of the plants that are still alive and green and look nice.
Some may call it a miracle of nature. 18 cocoa seedlings not only survived, but also thrived.
It's a very unusual result to find a strain that can withstand 3.5 months of a drought as new fresh seedlings, and also a severe cold front. It means that we may be able to develop strains that can expand the growing regions for cocoa.
The Volcani Institute has successfully developed other resilient plants in the past that are drought and cold resistant and more nutritious. Hence, these superhero cocoa plants that survive frontline conditions are proving to give not only the researchers hope, but also consumers around the world a pick-me-up.
Exciting thing about it is that cacao that is considered to be plant that growing in a rainforest, in places that it needs a lot of water. There is one ecotype that can survive with much less water, hardly no water at all.
We can see also here that we have a big differentiation between those that not only survive but are thriving. They have already matured and are continuing their development compared with others of the survivors that are delayed in their development. So this has given us yet another level of segregation and really has emphasized for us the 7 or 8 excellent candidates for continued development.
Emily Francis, I-24 News.
And this is it for Middle East Now. Stay tuned for the rundown with Kalev Ben David. Have a good night from Tel Aviv.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein holds talks in Lebanon trying to avert Hezbollah joining Iran in a major attack on Israel. We'll have the latest on a Mideast on edge. The IDF intensifies its operations against terror cells in the West Bank amid an upsurge of attacks. We'll break down the security situation on an overlooked front. As Israel's health system copes with an influx of wounded soldiers since October 7th, we'll take a closer look in a special report at the human cost of continual conflict. This is the Rundown on I-24 News. I'm Khaled Ben David. As regional tensions mount in anticipation of an attack on Israel by Iran and its proxies, the U.S. is stepping up its diplomatic efforts to avoid an escalation. U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein was in Beirut today and said he believed an all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah could be avoided, but that Israel and Hamas needed to move towards a ceasefire for Gaza. And despite Iran making a link to a potential Gaza ceasefire deal and its response to the targeted killings in Beirut and Tehran, its Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei said that refraining from striking at Israel would be a mistake. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran has more on the developing situation.
As Israel awaits a retaliatory strike from Lebanon, Hezbollah fighters continue to be targeted from the sky. At least 17 people were injured in a drone strike targeting a car and a motorcycle in the southern Lebanese town of Abbasiyah. It wasn't immediately clear how many of them were Hezbollah operatives. The airstrike followed several Hezbollah rocket and drone attacks on northern Israel with no reported injuries. The IDF responded by striking a Hezbollah military site in southern Lebanon's Aita Shaib.
We fully take responsibility for the situation we see before us in southern Lebanon. There is a systematic destruction of border villages and towns. There are daily assaults that escalate these aggressions. The least we can do is take our responsibilities with full seriousness, courage, and with all the strength we have.
As for the diplomatic route, U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein visited Beirut on Wednesday. In meetings with top Lebanese officials, Hochstein said a wider war between Israel and Hezbollah could be avoided.
We continue to believe that a diplomatic resolution is achievable because we continue to believe that no one truly wants a full-scale war between Lebanon and Israel, especially not the Lebanese people and the Israeli people. We can reach an end to the conflict now, but we understand that we also need to work to get to an end of the conflict in Gaza.
The Biden administration also sees a clear linkage between a Gaza ceasefire and a potential Iranian attack on Israel in retaliation for the killing of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran.
It's getting hard. We'll see what Iran does, and we'll see what happens if there's any attack. But I'm not giving up.
Are those two things tied together? Do you have the understanding that Iran could cease or stop doing an action if a ceasefire deal was possible?
That's my expectation, but we'll see. Thank you.
Biden's comments come after Iranian officials told Reuters that a retaliatory strike could be delayed to allow Gaza ceasefire talks to progress. But Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei hinted on Wednesday that avoiding such a strike against Israel would be a mistake. According to the interpretation of the Holy Quran, Khamenei said, a non-tactical retreat in any field, be it in the military field, political, propaganda, or economic fields, leads to God's wrath.
And with us in studio, we have Reserves IDF Colonel Grisha Yakubovich, former head of the Civilian Department of Kogat, and an Israeli-Palestinian relations expert. We have our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osran, and our reporter, Zach Anders. And Grisha, the U.S., Amos Hochstein, trying to find a diplomatic answer to these current tensions, avoid an Iran attack, an attack by its proxies, including Hezbollah, and an escalation. Any chance of that succeeding?
Well, we should expect 3 attacks. Let's not forget the Houthis.
Sure.
That they still owe us a debt.
Right.
We have Hezbollah,
Right.
With one of their most important assets that was assassinated or killed. And we have Iran, that nobody knows who did that there. Now, there are two ways to look at Iran. Two options, okay, that are on the table. One, usually when Iran payback, it's after 12 days. So the moment they raise the flags, the red flags on the mosques, they will respond after 12 days. Now we are already at the 14th day.
Right.
And they still did not respond.
So that's not happening. Yeah.
That's, so it might still happen, but they will not ruin the negotiations tomorrow. I think they will avoid that. On the other hand, they might create a build-up. And the build-up will be, let's force all the Western countries, led by the United States, to ask us, to beg us eventually. And at the end, we will be the one that will decide if we will apply or not. So this is also a very, very smart way to become a regional big influencer.
Right.
And that's also part of the response. Actually earning or achieving way much more than from what they will achieve if they will attack Israel.
All right, exploiting the situation. Let's go to northern Israel now, where Balir Sladin is there near the Lebanon border. And Balir, busy day up there. Attacks on Israeli territories in Kiryat Shmona. And now reports coming in of strikes in Lebanon, too.
Yes, exactly. The second time today, apparently, an assassination in Marjayoun, which is north of Metula, southern Lebanon, of course. Apparently, one Hezbollah member was killed in that attack, but several others, were wounded. According to the reports, there are civilians that are wounded in that attack as well. And just to remind everybody that whenever there are civilians that are wounded or killed in any Israeli strike, a large barrage of rockets also comes from Lebanon immediately after that. We have seen that also today after the attack in Tyre, where 3 Hezbollah members were killed, but several others were wounded in that attack, 16 in number. And straight away, Hezbollah targeted the center of Kiryat Shmona, the biggest city in the north of Israel. Apparently, 4 rockets landed in the center of Kiryat Shmona. Some damage was caused, but no casualties. So we see that sometimes they target Kiryat Shmona, other times the Golan, and also the towns that haven't been evacuated since October 8th. So towns that civilians are still there in northern Israel. Again, no casualties for now, but that is expected that a large barrage of rockets or maybe some drones will be fired after the attack in Marjayoun because of the fact that some civilians were wounded in that attack.
Right, and the question is, Balir, is this just the prelude to a much bigger attack in perhaps coordination with Iran? Or is Hezbollah at some point going to have to say, even with Amos Hochstein in there in Beirut trying to calm things, we're going to have to step up and not wait for this overall major assault?
Yes, well, sources in Lebanon are saying that Hochstein didn't bring anything new today. He came to Lebanon for, I don't know what's the number of visits he has already done since October 8th. But also this time, nothing new. He just hopes for the escalation between Israel and Hezbollah. But everybody knows in Lebanon that Hezbollah will respond to that assassination in southern Beirut a couple of weeks ago. So the goal of Hochstein, and that's what he said according to the sources, to keep the attacks in the normal range, as he's calling it, which means only the 10 kilometers, maybe the 20 kilometers deep inside Lebanon or deep inside Israel, and nothing more than that. No escalation toward Haifa, for example, or Tel Aviv that would trigger a bigger escalation, and also no more strikes in Beirut, hoping for the possibility of not just to get it closer and closer to bigger bigger war in this situation. But again, Hezbollah has said that there is nothing that can stop them from attacking Israel. That specific attack as a retaliatory attack for the assassination in southern Beirut, and not even a ceasefire in Gaza, and that's important, will not stop that attack. Something similar we've heard from Iran as well. So Hezbollah and Iran, they are not linking the ceasefire between the ceasefire for that attack. Maybe we've heard something different today or yesterday from Iran, but Hezbollah is still harsh in their response for the assassination in southern Beirut.
Right. I think we're hearing it sounds like differing voices within Iran itself, perhaps, and they themselves have not yet decided or made up their minds how and when to make their response. Balia Sladin in northern Israel, thank you for that. And speaking of Iran, Ariel reports today of a major cyber attack on its financial system. So the shooting war with Iran maybe hasn't started, but the cyber war seems to be well underway.
Yeah, this is based on reporting by Iranian opposition media that is based outside of Iran, so we do have to take that into consideration. But reporting on a widespread cyber attack targeting Iran's central bank as well as several other banks. Now, a video coming out from Iran taken by a local who went to an ATM, tried to take out money, and he couldn't because of the cyber attack. And the statement that appeared on screen at that ATM, as we can see right now, says, "Dear customers, it is not possible to withdraw money from the bank because all of Iran's budget and national resources have been invested in the war for the benefit of the corrupt regime of the Islamic Republic." So no clear fingerprint as to who it is, but Iran doesn't have a short list of enemies, we could put it that way. And given that one of the battlefields of this of Iran's wars with its various enemies is also the cybersphere, it is not surprising that Iran's targeted like this. This is a similar attack to the gas stations that we saw, the trains. This is being dubbed as one of the most significant cyber attacks on Iranian infrastructure. I'm not so sure that that's the scope of it, but indeed, if you want to take out money and you can't from the ATM, that is significant.
I see. It creates unease among the public.
Indeed.
Now, amid all the threats that Iran is hurling at Israel, Israel is finding that its strongest ally is offering a helping hand. The U.S. just announced a $20 billion arms sales to Israel, including fighter jets, air-to-air missiles, and tank ammunition. But as our correspondent Nicole Tzedek explains, that help is not immediately on its way.
You can't fight a war without resources. And now Israel will receive about $20 billion worth of resources from the United States.
The United States is committed to the security of Israel, and it is vital to U.S. national interests to assist Israel to develop and maintain a strong and ready self-defense capability. This proposed sale is consistent with those objectives.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken signed off on the massive arms sales, which includes 50 F-15 fighter jets, 320 air-to-air missiles, and 33,000 tank shells.
Thank you to Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Secretary of State Antony Blinken for advancing critical force buildup initiatives that assist Israel in developing and maintaining its qualitative military edge in the region. As we fight to defend Israel on 7 different fronts, your message of support and commitment to Israel's security are clear.
But this approved sale isn't immediately ready for delivery. The tank rounds could be available before 2026, but the fighter jets won't be all set until 2029. Still, it's a sign of Washington's long-term commitment to the Jewish state, and comes just 3 weeks after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed Congress, asking for this exact type of support.
Today, as Israel fights on the front line of civilization, I too appeal to America. Give us the tools faster, and we'll finish the job faster.
The most recent sale follows the controversy of President Joe Biden freezing a shipment of 2,000-pound bombs to Israel in May to try and prevent a massive operation in Gaza's southern city of Rafah. But months later, as the threat from Iran and its proxies expands, the U.S. seems to be speeding up its military help to the region.
And for more, we're now joined from Washington, D.C. by Bradley Bowman, Senior Director of the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Brad, great to have you with us. If I recall, you were quite critical of that Biden administration decision in May to hold up arms to Israel. So let me get your reaction to this step. Does that make up for it or not really?
Thanks for the opportunity to join you. I view this announcement yesterday, this announcement of five, that the administration has approved 5 foreign military sales to Israel as a laudable, positive, and belated step. I mean, a lot of these were sitting with the Biden administration for months. And so that's not good, given the urgency of the threats that Israel confronts. But I suspect that the administration saw a moment here where they could send these to Congress for approval with a good chance of them being approved. But your correspondent is exactly correct. All of these are not going to arrive for years. That doesn't mean this is irrelevant, because it's a statement of political support for Israel in a moment where it's potentially confronting a complex multi-front attack. And so this is an important political statement. These are real capabilities that Israel needs, but they won't arrive for years.
All right, so what would be another way for those who believe the U.S. should be helping Israel, for it to be helping in terms of a more immediate relief when it comes to arms or defensive goods?
Well, you know, I think we should acknowledge that the U.S. military has an extraordinary amount of combat power in the Middle East and is sending more there. Your viewers will know that we're expediting the transit of a second carrier strike group there, in addition to the one that's already in the region. We've got a Marine Expeditionary Unit, a large number of Air Force assets, air defense assets that have been sent. So that is significant. No country in the world, arguably in the history of the world, could do what we're doing right now to help defend Israel. It remains to be seen what form the aggression takes, whether it's worse than what we saw in April. I think due diligence requires us to assume that it could be worse and to be prepared to defend Israel. But if we solely play defense and we don't impose costs on Tehran as terror proxies, then we're going to simply incentivize them to keep crossing this Rubicon with direct attacks on Israel.
Now, I think the current situation, Brad, does underscore the fact that when it comes to arms, Israel is become highly dependent on, for example, on the U.S. It's unfortunately that arms sales to Israel, to everywhere, especially this region, have become a political hot issue. That raises the question of what Israel perhaps could be doing itself to make it less dependent on, for example, outside sources. What would you suggest, or what would you think how that could be addressed?
I think the factual basis of your question is correct, and I understand the Israeli impulse. There's two things that are true at the same time. One is that the United States has sent an extraordinary quantity and array of weapons to Israel after October 7th. Really impressive. Second only to the security assistance campaign to Ukraine in recent years. But what is also true is we've seen some weapons withheld and delayed, and growing criticism, public criticism, which is particularly unhelpful from the White House. So I understand the Israeli impulse to be self-sufficient. But the unfortunate reality is Israel will never be self-sufficient. It will never be a superpower in its defense industrial base. It's a technology superpower. It'll always be reliant on others. So there's a right way and a wrong way to try to reduce that dependency, but it'll never be eliminated. And we discussed this in a memo a few months ago.
Well, just very briefly, what's the right way?
The right way is to not try to undertake large-scale fighter systems and major systems that the U.S. can produce, but to focus on building as much as possible in Israel the systems that are most likely to be deprived from the United States, and that's particularly air-launched munitions. Air-launched, precision-guided munitions is where, if I were an Israeli, I would focus on building as much self-sufficiency as possible, among a few others.
All right. Bradley Bowman from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Well, let me get the response of an Israeli military man about that point, because that we've had, as Bradley says, people have been saying Israel has to stop being so reliant. But realistically, this country is not going to be building. Tried to build a fighter jet. That didn't go so well.
We need not to forget one thing. This administration, the Biden administration, supported and supports Israel like no one else did in the past. And we need to say thank you for that. And the statements are also important. Yes, the IDF needs those ammunition. The IDF needs those bombs, and I think it will be best if we will get them as soon as possible. Because if what we assume that will happen from Iran and from Iraq and from Syria and from Lebanon, we will need, as the State of Israel and the IDF, a lot of ammunition.
Right.
About the $20 billion, yes, it was said here, it will take time. It's not something that will reach Israel tomorrow morning, but this is a statement to the U.S. allies in the region. This is how we, the United States, behave or act and support our allies.
Right.
And it's important.
All right. Ariel, I understand there is an update out of Lebanon on the strike that we were talking.
We're talking about a significant chain of airstrikes, drone strikes on vehicles in southern Lebanon in recent hours. We'll start from the most up-to-date. 1 killed and multiple injured in Blida. After that, 2 killed and 4 injured in Marjayun. These are separate areas in southern Lebanon. 17 injured in Abbasiyah. We're hearing also reports on additional strikes, but these are targeted strikes on vehicles in southern Lebanon. Now, there's still no confirmation as to how many of these targeted wounded or killed individuals were indeed Hezbollah operatives. Hezbollah saying in one of their statements that in their latest strike on Kiryat Shmona, the 4 rockets that they launched, that was in response to targeting civilians in Abbasiyah. But this kind of close chain of pinpoint airstrikes on vehicles, I don't recall seeing in these past few weeks or months. This is indeed a significant evening as far as Israeli airstrikes are concerned.
I don't recall either, and I've been surprised seeing the video that you've been sending that they're so close to these urban dense, it looks like they're right in the middle of town.
These are in the cities.
Right, and Zach, you've been up north to know that when these kind of strikes happen, Hezbollah steps up its response.
Yeah, I think probably within the next few hours we're going to see something. I don't think we are still in that zone. I mean, who's to say, but we still haven't seen the reaction of as Hezbollah says, their strong reaction to Fuad Shukur's death yet. But there's been some really considerable launches in the last week. And today, too, what's taking place in Kiryat Shmona, if you're Hezbollah and you're seeing the Israeli media reports that your 3 rockets, or what was it, 2 rockets that got through with no alarm, I would think that maybe in that region tonight. I
would take, if I was in one, right, it's one of those cities.
I want to add one thing to that.
Yeah, sure.
Okay? Amos Hochstein threatened Hezbollah, so they would not dare to attack Israel while he is there and while this negotiation process will start tomorrow for 2 days.
And who's coming tomorrow to Beirut? The French foreign minister.
Right. And I think that it brings Hezbollah to a very huge dilemma. Should they act back or not? Because if they will respond back, it might reach to a situation that the negotiations tomorrow will collapse.
All right. Well, the coming hours will tell.
We were expecting a Hezbollah strike anyway, so this is probably a preemptive strike on Israel's part.
May well be the case there. All right, but let's turn from the north to another front that in recent months probably has not gotten the attention that it should have. The IDF announced a daytime counterterrorism operation in the West Bank, which is a statement that used to be pretty rare, but it's becoming more and more frequent these days as Israel works to combat brewing terror in Judea and Samaria. Nicole Tzedek has more.
Explosions heard echoing through the West Bank cities of Tubas and Tamun as the IDF launches a counterterrorism operation in broad daylight.
A short while ago, as part of counterterrorism activity in the Jordan Valley area, an aircraft struck a number of armed terrorists in the area of the town of Tamun.
Palestinian media claims 5 were killed in the operation so far, including 4 in a drone strike targeting a group of gunmen. The IDF says several wanted Palestinians were also detained, as well as weapons and military equipment seized. This is the same area in the Jordan Valley where former IDF commando Jonathan Deutsch was killed in a drive-by shooting attack on Sunday. This latest operation comes after a string of West Bank raids as the IDF works to temper the brewing terror hub. Since October 7th, Israeli forces have arrested more than 4,400 wanted Palestinians, roughly 40% of them affiliated with Hamas. The Palestinian Red Crescent says more than 600 people have been killed in these raids as well. At the same time, 26 Israelis, including security personnel, have been killed in Palestinian terror attacks in what's often described as the third front of Israel's ongoing war.
Right, and we should mention 4 soldiers injured there in that operation from a roadside bomb, an IED. In Grecia, the West Bank, again, we're so focused on Gaza, we're so focused on the north, even focused on attacks from the Houthis. Forget, right there is still a central front, and we've seen something of an upsurge in the attacks in the West Bank and in places, for example, like the Jordan Valley in recent days. Worrying signs.
Well, I wanna describe the 2 layers when it comes to the West Bank. The strategic layer is that there are huge efforts by Iran to smuggle weapons from Syria to Jordan and from Jordan to the West Bank. And we can see it during the last, I would say, 2 years, since May 2021, that the amount of weapons, of threats, of terrorists, is growing on a daily basis. And this is one of the 7 arenas that Minister Gallant mentioned. So solution number 1, Israel should provide a solution to close that border between Israel and Jordan, although Jordan has a huge, they implement a huge effort to stop it. Number 2 is what is happening in the northern part of Samaria, Jenin. Only yesterday it was published that Jenin is the leading district when it comes to terror. 161 terrorists that were killed by the IDF only in Jenin, and Jenin will become a symbol. And all the other towns will try and replicate it.
Yeah.
They will try to look the same, or they will try to be better. So this is why we see some sort of competition between Tulkarem, Nablus, Kalkilia, Tubas, Tamun, okay, to see if they can achieve the same achievements that Jenin is achieving. It means the PA are losing control in the West Bank, especially in the northern part of Samaria, and Israel is dealing with another growing on a daily basis arena. And I think that the mistake that Israel is doing, and they should change that, is to divide between terror and the people.
All right. Well, that could be another long discussion in of itself, but we'll leave it at that. But please, Grisha Yakubovich and Zach Anders, Ariel Osran, stay with us. We are getting out for a brief break, but lots more coming up in the second.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back to the Rundown on I-24 News. We're still here in studio with Reserves IDF Colonel Grisha Yakubovich and our reporters Zach Anders and Ariel Osran. And Ariel, more items coming out of this apparent IDF strike, or it is IDF strike, in Lebanon this evening.
A series of IDF strikes, and not just any strikes. These are targeted drone strikes on vehicles, cars, motorcycles in various towns in southern Lebanon. In a span of just a few hours, in an unprecedented way that we've seen since the start of the war. We're talking about, these are numbers based on Lebanon's health ministry. 2 people were killed and 4 injured in a drone strike on a car in Marjayun. And 1 person was killed and multiple people injured in a drone strike on a car in Blida. These are separate areas in southern Lebanon. And earlier today, 17 people were injured in a drone strike on a car and a motorcycle in El Abbasiyah. Now, there's still no confirmation as to how many of these targeted individuals, wounded or killed, were Hezbollah members. Obviously, Hezbollah trying to amplify the number of civilians. But usually when we see a targeted drone strike on a car, the target is almost always Hezbollah or a pro-Palestinian other terror organization that operates in the area. And I would imagine that in the coming hours we'll get more information as to the final outcome of these strikes.
Right, and perhaps see how Hezbollah will respond to this. Well, we have just mentioned a few times this evening the coming hostage talks. Officials from the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt, the 3 nations trying to mediate a hostage for ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, are scheduled to convene a summit meeting tomorrow in Doha in what some are calling a last best chance to finalize an agreement. Now, Israel will be sending its negotiating team to Doha. Hamas says they're boycotting the meeting, and both accuse the other of jeopardizing a deal by adding new conditions. Jody Notelowitz has the details.
A quote, last chance for all parties to reach a hostage deal as they convene in Doha on Thursday. Mediators from the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt will present the proposed changes to the ceasefire and hostage release deal between Israel and Hamas and address the remaining concerns of both sides. The families of the hostages are optimistic that this round could finally see their loved ones return.
For the past 3 months, they've been talking about a new proposal and a new deal. There's a gathering on Thursday in Qatar, I believe, and we're hopeful that this time it will make it.
But details of the new proposal and how it differs from previous versions remain unclear. At a Wednesday news conference in Beirut, U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein said it would be beneficial for all in the region if a deal is reached.
Speaker Barry and I also talked about the framework agreement that's on the table for a Gaza ceasefire, and he and I agreed there is no more time to waste, and there's no more valid excuses from any party for any further delay.
Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu denied he had made changes to the ceasefire proposal.
Prime Minister Netanyahu's July 27th letter does not introduce extra conditions and certainly does not contradict or undermine the May 27th proposal. In fact, Hamas is the one that demanded 29 changes to the May 27th proposal, something the Prime Minister refused to do.
On Sunday, it was announced that Hamas would not be taking part in this third round of talks, despite Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar reportedly expressing interest in ending the war.
It is Hamas that continues to set additional terms and has refused to reach an agreement.
Washington will be heavily pressuring all sides to arrive at an agreement this time around, but mediators are also bracing for its possible failure.
And staying on the hostage issue, new footage was made public last night showing the capture of an IDF tank along the Gaza border by a crowd of Hamas terrorists on October 7th. There were 4 soldiers kidnapped in the tank. There were 4 soldiers in the tank. 2 were killed during the attack, Az Daniel and Shaked Dahan. Their bodies were dragged into Gaza. The other two, Nimrod Cohen and Omer Nutra, were taken alive. They are believed to still be so as hostages. Now, the video of their capture was shown on Israel's Channel 12 News with permission of the soldiers' families. And joining us now is a cousin of one of those individuals who was in the tank and is believed to still be held hostage alive in Gaza, Omer Nutra. Yasmin Magal is joining us from Jerusalem. Yasmin, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start maybe by telling us a bit about Omer. He sounds like a remarkable young man, raised in Long Island, New York, as I was, left what I think I'm sure was a comfortable life there to come to Israel to defend this country.
Right. Thank you so much for having me. Omer is such a great kid. He's 22 years old. He was kidnapped when he was 21, but a week later, his birthday is on October 14th, so he turned 22. He indeed grew up in Long Island in his comfortable life. And after graduating from high school, he decided to take a gap year in Israel. And he fell in love with Israel and decided to stay and draft and protect this country. And he drafted and became a tank commander. And you all saw the footage yesterday. Him and his team were by the Gaza border protecting Israel, and they didn't stand a chance. So, yeah.
I'm sure it's very difficult, and I recall his parents spoke in front of the Republican National Convention, and they have been campaigning for to draw attention to his case. And I imagine as part of that, that's why, for example, the families gave permission for that footage to be released. But I'm sure that was a very painful thing, and it's a challenging and difficult time for the entire family to have to have that out there. Maybe tell us about how the family and you are coping with that.
So I can tell you the past 10 months, over 10 months, has been difficult. Specifically, since yesterday, since the footage has been released, yes, we got a little bit more attention about that. But it's not like it's new to us. We are familiar with the video, and I mean, I personally didn't see it, and because I don't want to. But I was told what's in it in the beginning, like 10 months ago. So I know what's in it, and I mean, but it is difficult to have it out there now and shared with the world and for everyone to see. I don't want to see Omer like this. I know what happened, and that's enough. I'm fighting for him, and I just know that if I see this, it'll crush me, and I don't know if I can handle that right now. I need to be strong for him so he can stay strong, and that I could keep fighting for him.
Of course, that's entirely understandable. Yasmin, as I'm sure you're aware, there's reporting of this meeting tomorrow in Doha. Some are calling it maybe the best chance or last best chance to get a hostage deal. I wonder what message you have from yourself or from your family, both to, for example, the Israeli government, but also to the wider world, the international community, keeping in mind, of course, that Omer himself is also a U.S. citizen.
Right. My message is that we need to remember all the hostages and make sure that in any deal that is sealed, Omer is included along with everyone else, and that no one is left behind. That's my message to the world and to the Israeli government and to all governments. Young men are people too, and soldiers are people too. Omer is a soldier, but he is my baby cousin. He's only 22 years old, and men suffer and as hostages as well. Men suffer in captivity, and we need to remember that and make sure that we don't leave anyone behind, including the young men.
Right, absolutely. Those who have been so valiant in defending this country. Yasmin Magal, we thank you so much for joining us. And of course, we extend our deepest hopes that Omer and all the hostages will be able to come home as safely and as soon as possible. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Grisha, how optimistic or not are you that something may come out of this meeting if regional circumstances don't cause any other complications?
You know, Kalev, I know Hamas since 1987. I'm one of the people who met Ahmad Yassin in his house back in Gaza when I was a young officer. I think that I understand a little bit how they think. Sinwar has no interest to reach to a deal. Why should he? He's a hero. His boss was killed in Iran. Now he is the leader. He appointed himself. Actually, the moment he did that, actually he stated that I want to live. And if he wants to live, the last thing that he should do is to release hostages. It will not assist him. It will not help him. Actually, his stubbornty and his will that this regional war will start, so Israel will remove forces from Gaza, and he will reach and he will achieve what he wants to achieve, is the day after the war to stay there as the leader of Hamas, as the Palestinian hero, and to come out as a hero from this war. So he has no interest to reach to a deal.
All right, well,
unfortunately.
One has to, of course, give due credence to your expertise in this. Yes. But I do hope, I mean, I'm speaking from my heart.
I do hope I'm wrong.
My mind, my brain, that something will come out of this. Now, Israel is fighting on many fronts, including the media front. Now, the Qatari news channel Al Jazeera has been banned from operating in Israel since May after the government revoked its license to broadcast from here, accusing it of distorting and sometimes outright lying about IDF operations in Gaza for the benefit and some charge at the behest of Hamas. But of course, Al Jazeera is still reporting from Gaza and still skirmishing with the IDF on the battlefield of journalistic accuracy and bias, with the latest dust-up centered over one reporter's coverage of the Israeli airstrike on a hospital shelter that was being used as a Hamas command center. Fabio Shapiro has the story.
Despite not being allowed to operate from Israel, Al Jazeera seems to never leave Israeli headlines. After the IDF strike at the UNRWA school last week, which was being used as a Hamas hideout, Anas al-Sharif, an Al Jazeera journalist in Han Yunis, reported that 100 people were killed during a prayer time, portraying all as victims of the, quote, Israeli occupation. Later that day, the IDF confirmed the killing of 19 Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists who were hiding in the complex. When other Al Jazeera journalists came in the defense of al-Sharif, IDF Arabic spokesperson Avihai Adri charged that the journalist covers up the crimes of Hamas and Islamic Jihad and said that he's convinced that al-Sharif knew the terrorists by name. In response, Al Jazeera released a press statement claiming, quote, such remarks are not only an attack on Anna's character and integrity, but also a clear attempt to stifle the truth and silence those who are courageously reporting from Gaza. To fire up the discussion, images posted on al-Sharif's social media showed al-Sharif taking selfies with Hamas officials. The fight between Israel and Al Jazeera is not a new one. The Qatari media company has been banned from operating in Israel since May, with the claim that it has acted in coordination with Hamas, especially on October 7 and since. The ban has since been renewed twice, and members of the Israeli parliament are pushing to make it permanent. But the fight between them has not ended up then. In July, Al Jazeera journalist Ismail Al-Ghul was killed in an Israeli airstrike, leaving the network to claim that, quote, the latest attack on Al Jazeera journalists is part of a systematic targeting campaign against the network's journalists and their families since October 2023. A little later, the IDF released a file showing Al-Ghul had been a Hamas member for the past 10 years. In June, the IDF rescued hostages Almog Meir, Andrei Kozlov, and Shlomi Ziv, who were being held at the home of Al Jazeera contributor Abdallah Al-Jamal. In a statement, Al Jazeera said that, quote, this man is not from Al Jazeera and he did not work for Al Jazeera at all. He is not listed as working for Al Jazeera, neither now nor in the past. Yet, his profile was found in the network's website, and Al Jazeera has since deleted the statement. As the next step of the war seems to get closer, The war of narratives continue at full steam.
Well, this is a difficult issue. I want to get two perspectives on this. I'll start with you, Zach, as a journalist, and the difficulty that Israel has in both dealing with that kind of situation and being accused of stifling journalistic freedom.
You know, this is a really interesting case. I don't think I've ever come across or seen anything like this, of a media outlet actively engaged in this, as Fabio described, a war of words between another government. The path forward, the path ahead, I don't understand what this looks like, what the end game is for the Israeli government to shut out a major network on the global stage for an indefinite amount of time. At some point, this relationship is going to need to be repaired, because Al Jazeera represents a major avenue and outlet to reach millions of people, a giant audience across the Middle East. And if you're trying to build bridges and mend fences, then you're going to, at some point, need to work with Al Jazeera to continue to produce some sort of positive results. But the scars are going to run very deep on this one.
Grisha, briefly, your response to that?
I think that we are paying the price of what we were lazy to do for years. This arena, this media arena, social media, TV stations, I think this is something that Israel and the IDF somehow abandoned and did not invest in that. And we said it in the past, in the IDF, in closed meetings, that we should build a command that will deal with what we say in Hebrew, Hezbollah. I think this is a bad word to say in Hebrew, Hezbollah, because it's like, you know, if I take it to Russia, it's propaganda. It sounds bad.
Public diplomacy.
Well, we can argue about it, okay? We don't have the time to argue about it. But this is something that we need to improve as the State of Israel and the IDF, because if you would build relations with Al Jazeera, personal ones, they will never reach.
Okay, but yes or no, Grisha, just a yes or no. Do you agree with the government ban on Al Jazeera, the current ban in place?
Yes.
Okay. Well, again, gentlemen, the differing viewpoints, and that's obvious because you're coming from different things. I want to thank Grisha Yakubovich and Zach Anders for joining us. Ari Osman is just going to stay with us because of the developing situation in Lebanon. We'll see if we do have to go back to that. If there's any breaking news, we'll let you know. But in the meantime, we are moving on. News headlines in Israel are often dominated by those the country has lost. I'm talking about the fallen soldiers and civilians killed in the current conflict. And we spoke about a couple of them this evening. But today, 10 months into the fighting, there are thousands of injured Israelis who are battling to recover. And their struggles are barely discussed. Natasha Kirchik went to meet some of the wounded to learn about how they're getting by the Israeli government and healthcare system, which remains overwhelmed by just the sheer number of new patients it has to deal with. Let's take a look at that.
Did you expect that you would be back here again after so many months?
I didn't expect that it would last this long. At the beginning, they told me that in 3 months I'd be running again in Tel Aviv. It's more like 2 years.
This is Aaron Bors. Last summer, he was busy getting married. But this summer, he's about to be readmitted to the hospital for the second time after suffering from a life-changing injury. In October of 2023, Aaron was drafted back into the Israeli army after Hamas terrorists infiltrated southern Israel and massacred hundreds of civilians. Within less than a week after the attack, the then 33-year-old reservist found himself fighting in northern Gaza when his combat unit came under fire by Hamas snipers hiding in a school.
Our job was to clear houses, look for tunnels, put pressure on Hamas to release the hostages. We had to cross in front of an UNRWA school. And within it, we didn't know, were Hamas terrorists waiting for us to cross. My officer was the first to go down, and he was in terrible shape. I made the split-second decision to sprint and try to get him out of there. The same sniper that shot him shot me in my right leg. Sure enough, they started to shoot all around me. I started to crawl. As I'm crawling, I get shot in my left leg by an AK-47. So I was bleeding profusely out of 4 places, and I'm very lucky to be alive.
Aaron's story is a tragic one, but it's sadly no longer unique. In Israel, tens of thousands of civilians and soldiers have been injured in the war since October 7th. This means there are thousands of Israelis who will be dealing with debilitating injuries for the rest of their lives, both physically and mentally.
That's a long.
Aaron, yeah.
Actually,
can I take a picture with you?
How long do you need to have that for?
2 weeks.
2 more weeks?
He is already with it 7 months.
Is that what you do? You scare everybody like that?
Yeah. It's not hurt. It's just heavy.
2 weeks and it's out.
Yeah. And he just will start with that.
Today, Aaron is showing me around Sheba Medical Center, where he lived for 5 months while undergoing multiple surgeries. He still comes back here 3 times a week for rehab, but he's preparing to be readmitted.
Aaron, I feel like I'm walking with a celebrity everywhere I go.
This is where I started physical therapy after the hospital. And this is actually when I thought that the bone was growing, because I was able to walk without a crutch. It turns out that's just muscle and a really, really strong piece of metal in my leg.
So if the bone doesn't grow?
So I'll be on crutches for life.
The bullet that hit Aaron's right leg destroyed 8 centimeters of his bone. Doctors thought it was beginning to grow back, but he's just been dealt with a devastating blow that he's going to have to go through another surgery to make that happen.
Like doing squats is difficult, and like balancing is difficult. And those are things that I have to rebuild in order to start walking again.
Some people look at this and are like, this literally looks like hell.
It's the same as so many other things in life. When you don't have it, all of a sudden you really want it. I think about now all the times I wanted to go for a run or to do more half marathons in Tel Aviv. And I'm like kicking myself. I should have done it then.
Since October 7th, over 17,000 civilians have been injured in the ensuing war. Close to 3,000 have dealt with moderate to serious injuries, and over 140 have died while being treated in the hospital. The numbers aren't far off when it comes to wounded soldiers. Over 4,300 soldiers have been physically wounded, along with thousands more who are suffering from mental health issues like post-traumatic stress disorder.
That's my prosthetic. I'm amputated about the knee.
Daniel Kopilov is just 20 years old. He loves hiking and spending time in nature, and he was recently drafted into the Israeli army, like almost all other 18-year-olds in Israel. He had just finished his commander's course when he was called to serve in Gaza, and on his first day there, his unit entered a booby-trapped building.
I was the first one to enter the building with my officer. Terrorists activated the booby trap from far. The building exploded. I just remember that my leg was cut off. 3 of my friends died, and I was basically unconscious for 2.5 days. I got my leg amputated. They took part of my stomach, and I got burned all over my hands, my face.
Daniel has been in treatment at Sheba Medical Center for 5 months now. His family has had to leave their home in northern Israel and move to the center near the hospital so that once he's released, he'll be able to continue going to rehab.
Do you feel like you're the same person as before?
Yes and no. I had plans after the army. I'm not able to do all the things that I want to do or for now.
Everything in your life basically changed.
A lot of my plans, they or canceled or I need to adapt them to my disability.
Daniel's hoping to be released from the hospital this month, but there are still hundreds of wounded Israelis being treated in hospitals across the country.
We are treating now roughly about 110 patients that was injured from this war. We treated something close to 600 patients in the rehab center. There are much more patients that was injured.
The sheer number of patients being treated has backed up Israel's healthcare and defense system enormously. While many are supposed to be receiving financial support from the government, getting it doesn't always come easy.
We have to wait quite a few weeks to see things reimbursed. Coming out of the hospital, going home, some people need chairs in the shower, some people need rails put into the bathroom. These are things that you open tickets for Ministry of Defense, and sometimes they do get backed up if people don't know how to push buttons the right way.
You give me a jab, you give me a cross. Yes. We started the whole process a long time ago. I was barely able to stand up, and now look at him, he's a beast.
Feel like you are defined by your injury?
I'm Aaron Bors and I have my own life, and my life has layers, but right now those layers are completely cut off. My life revolves around this injury right now. One day, hopefully, it'll be a scar, and I'll be able to bring it up only when I want to. And people will only know I'm injured if I tell them. Or people will only know I was injured if I decide to tell them. Can't wait for that.
Well, let's not forget these brave young men and women who have sacrificed so much for the rest of us. Ariel, let's just go back to the developments out of Lebanon this evening, which are quite significant.
Yeah, Kalev, the Israeli Air Force has been very busy tonight with at least 3 major targeted drone strikes on vehicles in southern Lebanon. The ground total, according to Lebanese health officials, 3 people killed and over 20 people injured, 17 in one airstrike, 17 injured in one airstrike in Abbasiyah. Now, there's still no confirmation as to how many of these targeted people were Hezbollah operatives. That should emerge in the coming hours.
All right, that ends our report. Thank you for joining us on I-24 News.